They drank from goblets of gold, while their enemies screamed beneath iron boots. He walked into his throne room, soaked in perfume, and the blood of servants who had looked at him wrong. One king bathed in crushed rose petals, another preferred the blood of animals or worse. But this isn't fiction. One of them believed he was made of glass, so fragile he refused to let anyone touch him and wore steel cages under his robes to avoid shattering. Another fed his enemies to lions, not for punishment, but for entertainment during dinner. And one, perhaps the most terrifying of all, ruled while entirely unhinged. His people whispered about the voices he claimed to hear at night. He trusted no one, not even his own sons. He watched his empire rot under his paranoia. And when the final revolt came, he laughed, while flames swallowed his palace whole. Who were these men? Why were they allowed to rule? How could such madness sit on a throne wrapped in velvet and crowned in gold? This isn't just about kings. It's about absolute power and the terrifying, beautiful, destructive things it can awaken in a man's soul. You think you know history, you don't. Not until you've met these 11 kings, the most dangerously insane rulers the world has ever known. And yes, they were very real. Charles VI of France rose to the throne in the late 14th century, amidst the fires of the 100 Years' War with England and the blood-soaked chaos of France's civil strife. At a time when the nation needed a steady hand to survive, the young king gradually slipped into delusion, convinced that he was made of glass. He became a symbol of a monarchy imploding not from foreign swords, but from the fracture of its own sovereign's mind. In ancient Rome, a boy named Gaius Caligula was raised among gold, marble, and blood. The son of Germanicus, a beloved general, Caligula ascended to the imperial throne to overwhelming joy from the people. But within months, that light turned to shadow. The Roman Empire under Caligula became a grotesque theater of self-deification executions as entertainment and a literal marriage to his horse. Power in Caligula's hands didn't bring peace, it unleashed madness. In Eastern Europe, Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible, became the first Tsar of Russia. From orphaned boy in a frozen Kremlin to the architect of an iron-fisted autocracy, Ivan embodied the wrath of a brutal age. He created the Oprichnina, a black-clad force of terror, and painted the Russian land with the blood of imagined traitors. He ruled not through law, but through fear, sharpened like a blade. In the far north, Christian VII of Denmark was born into the Age of Enlightenment, when Europe was awakening to reason and reform. Yet the crown he inherited became a cage. Christian displayed signs of severe mental illness, compulsive self-destructive behaviors, and emotional instability. He became a puppet king manipulated by his physician and betrayed by his queen, leading to one of the most scandalous palace coups in Scandinavian history. Returning to Central Europe, Ludwig II of Bavaria was a royal dreamer. While Germany moved toward unification under Bismarck's iron will, Ludwig withdrew into a private world of opera fairy tales and architectural fantasy. He drained the royal treasury to build dreamlike castles, lived in isolation, and disappeared under mysterious circumstances. A king who didn't rule, who couldn't fight, only vanish into legend. George III of England ruled over one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. But as the American colonies rebelled and Napoleonic wars loomed, the king's mind faltered. Historical records describe him talking endlessly, addressing trees as if they were dignitaries, and sometimes failing to recognize his own son. A regency was quietly formed as England learned the hard way crowns offer no protection against madness. Nero, one of Rome's most infamous emperors, rose in the twilight of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. But he would not be remembered for statecraft or reform. Instead, he would live in infamy for playing the liar as Rome burned, for murdering his own mother and wife, and for turning public executions into bloody spectacles. Nero set fire to everything: his city, his family, and his soul. In the Islamic world, Sultan Ibrahim the Frere of the Ottoman Empire, known in history as Ibrahim the Mad, emerged from 20 years of enforced isolation in the Topkapi Palace. His mind, shaped by confinement, whispers of conspiracy and fear of assassination unraveled quickly. His reign was a whirlwind of erratic orders, decadent obsessions, and mass executions of concubines over dream-born paranoia. To the south, King Farouk of Egypt ruled in the turmoil of the 20th century. While the world faced war and revolution, Farouk lived like an oversized child, hoarding rare watches, indulging in gluttony, gambling away national funds, and proclaiming ownership of every beautiful dress in Cairo. His regime didn't collapse from rebellion, it collapsed from ridicule. Peter III of Russia, husband of Catherine the Great, was a strange, fragile figure. While Russia needed strength and diplomacy, Peter played with toy soldiers, worshipped Russia's enemy, and wore enemy uniforms in public. He was overthrown by his wife in a swift, almost bloodless coup after only 6 months. He became a symbol of the tragic mismatch between authority and reality. And finally, Justinian II of Byzantium, heir to the great Justinian. One inherited a weakened empire under siege. Though initially capable, he began hearing voices screaming at night, biting his attendants, and rolling through palace corridors like a wounded beast. Ultimately, he abdicated, not to spare the throne, but to spare what was left of his sanity. Each of these monarchs is a distorted mirror of power, what it becomes when not guided by reason, but consumed by obsession, terror, ecstasy, or delusion. And now, with the full picture laid bare, we are ready to descend into the madness itself. The fall doesn't begin with thunder. It begins with silence. Charles VI of France sat on his throne like a statue, motionless, eyes glassy mouth, trembling without words. Outside, Paris simmered with anxiety. The 100 Years' War raged on. France teetered on collapse. The king, once hailed as the savior of his nation, now believed he was made of glass. He ordered iron rods sewn into his royal robes. He banned anyone from touching him, fearing even the slightest brush might shatter his fragile body. Ministers whispered behind closed doors. The court walked on eggshells. At times, Charles would forget his wife's name. He mistook his sons for soldiers. Other days he would bark orders with perfect clarity, only to retreat the next into babbling nonsense. Power clung to him, but sanity fled, and so did France. While France fractured, Rome burned. Caligula had begun his reign with celebration. The people adored him. The Senate praised him. Statues were raised, coins struck. A god, they said. A golden boy. Then came the sickness. He returned changed. His laughter grew cruel. He executed senators for sneezing, forced nobles to run beside his chariot like dogs. At banquets, he chose victims at random to be dragged out and killed for sport. One day he declared himself divine. Not metaphorically, literally. He ordered temples built in his name. And when reverence wasn't enough, he found adoration in fear. He made his horse a consul, draped it in purple, gave it a marble, stable, fed it oats, mixed with gold flakes. It was madness, cloaked in majesty. And no one dared protest, because when Caligula smiled, people died. From the ruins of Rome to the frozen corridors of the Kremlin, Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, carried the same poison in his veins. Orphaned young, he was raised in a court of treachery. Dogs tore flesh from traitors before his eyes. Whispers became knives. By the time he was crowned Tsar at 16, he trusted no one. For a time he ruled justly. Then his wife died, and the world turned red. He created the oprichniki, his black-clad death squad. They rode through cities like reapers, executing entire towns on a whim. He accused priests of betrayal, ordered infants drowned in rivers, paraded severed heads through banquets. The peak came with his own son. A quarrel, a raised voice, a flash of rage. Ivan struck his heir with a metal scepter. The boy collapsed. Blood soaked his robes. Ivan fell to his knees beside the body, sobbing, begging, screaming for forgiveness that never came. Russia had a Tsar, but he had killed its future. In Bavaria, the madness took a different form. Ludwig the Saint did not thirst for blood. He yearned for beauty, art, fantasy. He built castles with spiral towers, frescoed halls, and golden swans gliding across ceilings. Neuschwanstein was his dream given stone. He commissioned operas, lived alone, spoke to mirrors, dined without guests. He drained the treasury, refused to engage in politics, spoke of himself as a myth. Ministers watched in horror as the king disappeared into his own world. He was declared insane, removed from power. The next morning, his body was found floating in a lake. No wounds, no struggle, just stillness. A fairy tale king lost in the fog. In Denmark, Christian VII sat draped in velvet eyes, twitching hands shaking. He could not rule, could barely hold a fork. He laughed at funerals, cried during state meetings. Obsessed over self-pleasure to the point of collapse. The court turned cold. His physician, Struensee, gained influence then power. Then the Queen. For 2 years, Struensee ruled Denmark in all but name. Then came the scandal, the arrest, the execution, the Queen's exile. And Christian, he never noticed. He lived another 40 years in forgotten silence, a king only by title. In England, King George III stared at the garden and spoke to the trees, sometimes for hours. He ranted about invisible enemies, wrote sentences 20 feet long, at times lucid and wise, other days unreachable. He ruled while the American colonies slipped away. While Europe changed forever, he remained, mumbling to flowers. While across the sea, Nero played his lyre. Rome burned. Flames climbed wooden rooftops. Screams filled alleys. And Nero the emperor stood high and watched. Some say he sang, some say he wept. But everyone remembers the fire. He killed his mother, his wife, countless enemies. He made death a form of art, executions as opera, poison as poetry. When rebellion came, he fled, hiding in a villa cornered, abandoned. He stabbed himself in the throat. His last words, "What an artist dies in me." Meanwhile, far from Rome's ashes, another empire decayed from within. Sultan Ibrahim I had spent 2 decades in confinement before becoming ruler of the Ottoman Empire. He emerged paranoid, erratic, broken. He drowned concubines by the hundreds, believed jewels gave him strength. He demanded women be selected based on body weight, obsessed with physical proportions. The court feared him. Eventually they removed him. Silently, no monument, no mourning. In Egypt, Farouk I collected cars, watches, and scandal. He drank, gambled, seduced, boasted. While the people starved, he hosted lavish feasts, bought entire bakeries to hoard their pastries. They called him the last pharaoh. Then the military came. Farouk fled with hundreds of suitcases, among them one full of pornographic magazines. He died in exile, obese, and alone, choking on a meal too rich for his ruined body. Peter III of Russia reigned for just 6 months. He admired Prussia more than his own empire, played with toy soldiers, dressed in enemy uniforms, ignored his wife Catherine. She overthrew him. He died shortly after. Most believe it wasn't an accident. And lastly, just in the scent of Byzantium, he inherited a legacy of greatness. But when the weight came down, his mind cracked. He screamed through the night, bid his servants, ordered organs played to soothe his madness. In lucid moments, he wept, and in one rare hour of clarity, he abdicated. His final act of mercy, removing himself from the throne. 11 kings, 11 minds undone by power, grief, fear, and fantasy. Some ruled through terror, others through silence. All fell, one by one, and now only the aftermath remains. There is a moment before every end when silence sharpens, when the world leans in, holding its breath, just before the final cut. For Charles VI of France, death came not with a blade, but as a slow drowning. 30 years of lucid intervals and madness had hollowed him out. He died in 1422, alone in body and spirit, his court fractured and his legacy tangled in war. Even as he lay dying, some believed the King of France still thought he was made of glass, shatterable, fragile, a mind forever echoing with fear. Caligula's end was sharper. One moment he walked through the marble halls of his palace, wrapped in silk, adored or feared by all who passed. The next, a flurry of daggers. His own guards turned against him. They struck without hesitation, without warning. As his blood pooled on the tiles, Rome exhaled. It was done. The god was dead, and no temple could save him now. Ivan the Terrible collapsed while playing chess. An old man, wrecked by violence, by grief, by his own sins. Some say he was poisoned, others, that his heart simply gave up. But even as he fell, his name carried weight, not one of reverence, but of dread. His last act was not an apology nor a prayer. It was silence. Ludwig II was found floating in the still waters of Lake Starnberg. No splash, no witness. His psychiatrist lay dead nearby. Officially, a suicide. Unofficially, a mystery that deepens with each century. The king who built dreams in stone had disappeared into the mist, becoming legend. Christian VII of Denmark faded in slow motion. He did not speak much in his final years. His eyes followed no one. His hands twitched but never grasped. He died in 1808, not as a king nor a man, but a ghost that lingered far too long in a palace that no longer needed him. George III of England lost more than his crown, he lost himself. In his last decade, he was blind deaf and permanently insane. Locked away in Windsor Castle, fed like a child, bathed like an invalid. He died in 1820, a monarch in name only. The king who once ruled an empire now lived and died in silence, buried by time before earth ever touched him. Nero, once the golden boy of Rome, met his end in a rented villa, shaking abandoned. As the Senate declared him an enemy of the state, he begged for someone to kill him. No one would. So he took the blade himself. His death was not noble. It was messy, pathetic, a god of blood and fire undone by fear. Ibrahim Thipraj of the Ottoman Empire was strangled by order of his own ministers. A silk cord, the traditional tool of execution, wrapped around his neck in quiet efficiency. There was no trial, no outcry, just shadows and breathless silence. The women of the harem whispered prayers. The empire moved on. Farouk, I died at a restaurant in Rome, fat and forgotten. One moment he was laughing. The next his body hit the floor. A heart attack, they said. Poetic in a way. The last pharaoh, choking on decadence. There were no crowds at his funeral. Only debts, disgrace, and a nation that no longer remembered him. Peter III of Russia was imprisoned, then mysteriously found dead. The official story said colic. The unofficial one whispered murder. His wife, Catherine, never admitted to it. She didn't have to. The crown passed quietly. The Tsar was buried quickly. The empire looked forward. Justin II of Byzantium died in a padded room. His screams had long since faded to murmurs. Music played to calm him, but by then he no longer heard it. He was once heir to Justinian, ruler of a proud empire. He died as a madman, mumbling to walls with no throne, no army, no crown. Each death was different. Some fast, some slow. Some loud, others quiet. But all were inevitable. History does not forgive. It does not heal. It simply buries and waits for the next king to fall. When power dies, it does not vanish. It lingers in letters and ruins and whispers passed down through centuries. Charles VI left France broken. His madness helped fracture the kingdom into warring factions, paving the way for English dominance and internal civil war. Yet even in his shattered state, he remains a figure of fascination. His legacy lives not in battles won, but in the cautionary silence surrounding mental illness and monarchy. Caligula became the blueprint for tyranny. His name echoes through time as a warning of what happens when power divorces itself from reality. Statues of him were toppled, his memory condemned, but the myth endured a god-emperor, undone by his own theater of cruelty. Ivan the Terrible remains etched in Russia's soul. Streets bear his name. Churches he funded still stand. But so do the haunted stories, the paintings of his anguished face, the image of a father killing his son, a moment so unbearable it became folklore. Ludwig II, once dismissed as mad, is now beloved. His castles are world wonders. His eccentricity is romanticized, even celebrated. Tourists walk the halls he built not knowing they were born from a mind-fleeing reality. He is remembered not as a ruler, but as an artist who happened to wear a crown. Christian VII is largely forgotten. But Struensee the doctor, who used him as a puppet, remains a symbol of how intellect can flourish and be punished under madness. Their story became one of Denmark's most retold political tragedies. George III became a symbol of dignity lost. Modern diagnoses suggest he suffered from porphyria or bipolar disorder. Today, he is viewed with more empathy than contempt. Not a mad tyrant, but a man betrayed by his own biology. Nero remains the face of Rome's decadence. His name invoked through fire and violin defines the moment when a civilization caves under its own weight. Whether he truly watched Rome burn hardly matters. The legend is stronger than the truth. Ibrahim Thurn was nearly erased. Ottoman historians downplayed his reign, focusing instead on his successors. But in whispers and archived records, his descent remains a grim footnote, a reminder of what happens when isolation becomes insanity. Farouk I became a cautionary tale. His exile marked the end of monarchy in Egypt. Today he is remembered not for governance but for indulgence, the king who dined while Cairo crumbled. Peter III is remembered mainly for his wife, Catherine the Great. His reign brief and baffling lives on, mostly as a prologue to her greatness. But his fall still echoes as a warning not every crown fits the head it lands on. Justin II's end faded into history's margins. Yet for Byzantium, scholars, his name signals the slow unraveling of an empire once mighty. His story is often passed over, perhaps because it's too painful, too personal. A man crushed by the shadow of a predecessor, too great to follow. These kings are gone, their crowns buried, their kingdoms changed, but their madness left marks, in art, in law, in memory. A reminder power without balance breaks, always. And the higher the throne, the harder the fall. You've met 11 kings, 11 men who held the highest power imaginable and fell into the darkest corners of the human mind. Some ruled through terror, others through illusion. Some left legacies carved in marble, others left only whispers and ash. But every one of them reminds us of a truth we still forget: the crown does not protect the mind. In fact, it often breaks it. And this is only one chapter of history's madness. If you thought Caligula was terrifying, wait until you meet the queen who made him look tame. If Evine chilled your blood, there's a Romanov who burned everything down just to feel alive. And if Ludwig made you ache with beauty, wait until you see the artist king who built a paradise no one was allowed to enter. So don't stop here. There are more crowns, more ruins, more minds lost to power. Click now to uncover the next royal tragedy. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Because the past doesn't sleep. It haunts.